Hello, fellow exiles. It's been a long league here in Settlers, with the release of PoE 2 on the horizon. I wanted to look back at what I've accomplished this league while playing a build that most would regard as trash, Wild Strike Scion. I'll get into the build a little more at the end of the video, but first I'll show you some gameplay footage. I'm just farming some T16 Einhar Essence memories. These aren't too hard to run with a high-level character anymore, but some of the rogue exiles can do some serious damage. Thankfully, I can permanently freeze most enemies below pinnacle bosses, so my defense isn't tested too much here. It's a good thing I have lifesteal because the ambient effects from so many essences are still hitting me even when the monster is frozen. That attrition damage is often the bigger problem with essences when you don't have good recovery, even if the monster itself isn't particularly threatening. Here's a Settlers mining encounter where I can defend both sides because I have Sion's Ambition anointed, which gives me more range on my extra strike targets. You'll notice that I Warcry before opening the essences. This lets me apply all my curses with Battlemage Cry, which gives me some extremely high damage on single targets like essences. One place where the build is still weak is in raw move speed. Rage does not give movement speed anymore, so I only have Boots, Quicksilver, and Onslaught for move speed. I dropped a T17 map. Very nice. I don't have to roll it at all. I hope I'm not making anyone cringe too hard by running my Breach Atlas with this map, but I have too much map modifier effect on my other Atlas trees, so this one will do. In truth, I very rarely run T17 maps when playing PoE because I try to make my own builds, and most of my builds are far from capable of running these maps. Even after the nerfs to T17 maps, they can still be quite brutal. It was a pleasure to find that a melee Scion of all things was my first build to live up to the challenge of completing them. I should try to find the boss before grabbing too many of these eater nodes because they could potentially make things hairy with Lycia. Breaches with Breach Boss Scarabs have been my main farm in Settlers League because the splinters from bosses drop in large stacks. I don't have single splinters except Chayula on my filter at all because I value the continued health of my hands and wrists. Breaches also give some of the best experience in the game, which is how I reached level 100 on this character. If you want to do breaches too, I actually recommend doing them in tier 16 maps. I really need to find that boss, but I'm not familiar with the layout. It would be even better if I could keep these shrines for the whole boss fight, but she does have a few phases. I'll just skip over a few packs here and try to find that portal icon on the minimap. I fought this boss in Sanctum a few times, but this is my first time fighting her at Tier 17. It's a good thing that I managed to end the fight quickly, because I definitely could have died to the lightning waves in her second phase. Wow, I think that's a new attack. Well, there she goes. These Tier 17 map bosses are always worth doing because they drop these uber fragments. Here's my passive tree. I'm using an unnatural instinct to grab a lot of nodes inside the radius of Light of Meaning. I'm sure that other people have figured out this trick to get a lot of increased damage too. My ascendancies are Juggernaut and Slayer, and I use Forbidden Jewels to take Elementalist too. The real damage scaling starts here with the Elemental Equilibrium Keystone. My Wild Strike is always hitting with either cold or lightning damage, but the enemy resists that damage with their fire resistance because I am wearing the unique body armor, the Admiral. My weapon of choice is a war staff crafted for physical damage. Wild Strike converts that physical to elemental damage. This medium cluster is a megalomaniac which gives me onslaught and allows me to leech mana with elemental damage. It doesn't sound like much, but it solves a big problem with the left side of the tree lacking mana leech. Here I have smashing strikes to generate endurance charges. Endurance charge generation is a huge advantage of using a staff in melee. By the way, I only need one combat focus jewel because cold and lightning are both good elemental ailments to inflict, and then I just avoid fire for my elemental equilibrium. Storm Shroud is a common pickup to avoid elemental ailments. My boots give me 100% chance to avoid being shocked. Then I have this Lethal Pride jewel. The name on the jewel doesn't matter, but the number does. I have a bunch of extra damage on these notables in radius of the Lethal Pride. POB is the best way to shop for a good Lethal Pride. Oh yeah, and my spell suppression is awful. I still haven't managed to cap it. Yes, that can get me killed sometimes, so the build is far from perfect. I think my gear is decent, but I would need to buy some spell suppression fractures and spend a lot more money to hit 100% spell suppression. The rares aren't that bad now that I'm looking at them though, and I spent some time fishing for good corruptions on my unique items. This anathema in particular is fantastic because staves have relatively low attack speeds and I need all I can get. Here I have flammability, punishment, and elemental weakness in my Battlemage Scry setup. Anathema gives me 4 curses, so I still have room for my mark on hit. Some two-handed builds don't leverage their secondary 6 link very well, but I am glad to fit life tap and duration into my Battlemage Scry to maximize uptime. When it's all put together, I can reduce the enemy's fire resistance by 25% with Elemental Equilibrium, 20% with the Elementalist Ascendancy, 37% with Flammability, and 30% with Elemental Weakness. That's a lot of resistance to shred off a pinnacle boss that starts with 50% base resistance. It was a lot of fun theory crafting a build with the Admiral because it lets me scale multiple element types and hit the enemy's weakest element regardless. Here's my stat screen. Nothing too impressive, but I'm immune to stuns, ailments, and so on. You can check the POB in the description.